Bears block cars on the highway. When people learn the truth, everyone is shocked. The sun had only just begun to stretch its pale fingers over the horizon when the convoy of vehicles rolled into the heart of Denali Reserve. A thin veil of mist blanketed the forest floor, curling around the bases of towering spruce and birch trees like breath exhaled from the earth itself. It was early summer in Alaska, but the air still held a bite, crisp and clean, filled with the scent of damp moss and pine. Birds chirped distantly, a few more daring rays of sunlight filtering through the trees to catch on the dewy leaves. The lead vehicle, a rugged forest green van fitted for off-road excursions, slowed as it approached a bend. Inside, the tour guide, a man in his 50s with weathered features and a calm voice, was sharing a story about bear migration patterns, gesturing toward a gully that sloped into a dense patch of thicket. His words trailed off as something unusual came into view. Just beyond the curve, directly on the dirt path, two massive grizzly bears stood side by side, unmoving. Their shaggy coats glistened with moisture from the mist, and their powerful forms exuded both stillness and tension. Between them, curled in a small heap, was a cub, motionless, limbs awkwardly splayed as if it had collapsed mid-step. The guide's hand froze in midair. "Everyone stay calm. Stay inside the vehicle," he said quietly into the intercom that connected the cars behind him. The brakes hissed as each vehicle rolled to a stop, the passengers inside murmuring in confusion, craning their necks for a better look. Cameras were raised. A few gasps echoed from the second van, where the passengers had a better angle on the scene. What at first seemed like an awe-inspiring wildlife sighting quickly shifted into something far more serious. In the third vehicle, a woman in Ranger green leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. "That cub isn't moving," she murmured. She turned to the man beside her, also in reserve gear. "Is that, Anna, do you see the breathing?" The woman leaned toward the glass, watching for a sign, any sign, of motion in the small body. After a few heartbeats, she gave a slow nod. "Shallow. Very shallow." The three of them were part of the Denali Wildlife Medical Response Unit, on a scheduled field observation ride shadowing the tourist group to monitor animal activity and observe interactions in case of emergencies. They hadn't expected to be called into action so soon. The guide spoke again, calmly and clearly. "Remain still. Do not open the doors. Do not make noise. We may have a serious situation here." His words, though quiet, carried a weight that stilled the chatter in the convoy. Tourists looked at one another with wide eyes, the mood shifting from excitement to concern. The adult bears had not moved. One of them, a slightly larger female, likely the mother, tilted her head as if listening. The other bear's ears twitched back and forth, its body tensed but not aggressive. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl, quiet but unmistakable. Protective. A warning, not a threat. The medics exchanged glances. "They're not going anywhere," the male medic whispered. "She's guarding that cub." "They both are. But they're not advancing. They're waiting." Anna's voice was calm but laced with urgency. "If we don't act, that cub might not make it. But one wrong move." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone in the car knew the stakes. The decision was made quickly, silently. The team gathered their gear, non-invasive medical kits, fluids, heat packs, stretchers. No tranquilizers. No weapons. This would have to be done with trust and understanding. They stepped out slowly, first opening the doors just enough to slide through. The moment the click of the latch echoed into the clearing, both bears shifted. The female lowered her head slightly, hackles raised just a touch. The growl returned, deep, guttural, but still controlled. The male bear took a half step forward, muscles rippling under thick fur. The medics froze, keeping their bodies relaxed, non-threatening. The guide, still watching from the lead van, reached for the radio and spoke again. "They're not attacking. They're letting them approach." Every eye in the convoy was trained forward now, cameras forgotten. The forest held its breath. Slowly, step by step, the medics approached the cub. Each movement was deliberate, no sudden gestures, no direct eye contact with the adults. When the trio were within just a few feet of the cub, they dropped to a crouch. The male medic reached forward with gloved hands, gently touching the cub's side. Its fur was cold. The breathing was slow, labored. A quick assessment confirmed their fears: signs of hypothermia, low responsiveness, possible dehydration. Time was not on their side. The team conferred in soft murmurs, barely louder than the rustling leaves. The only answer that made sense was transport, careful, immediate evacuation to the nearest wildlife aid station just under 5 kilometers away. The cub was gently lifted onto the stretcher, wrapped in thermal blankets, and cradled as securely as a newborn. As they stood, carrying the small body between them, the mother bear let out another sound, this time higher in pitch, almost mournful. The medics paused. One of them turned her head slightly and met the bear's gaze, not challenging, just an acknowledgement. "We're not taking her away," she said softly, though the bear couldn't understand words. "We're trying to save her." As the convoy slowly began moving again, the adult bears did not chase. Instead, they stepped back, melting into the treeline like shadows returning to the forest. But they didn't disappear entirely. Even as the vehicles rolled on, the glint of eyes could be seen among the mist and underbrush, tracking the stretcher's path. Silence settled over the tourists. The usual chatter, laughter, and camera clicks were absent. Even the forest seemed quieter, more reverent. The tour guide, one hand still on the wheel, exhaled slowly. "Well," he said quietly to himself, "I've been doing this for 20 years. Never seen anything like that." In the back of the van, a child sat wide-eyed, clutching their mother's hand. "Will the baby bear be okay?" they whispered. The mother didn't answer right away. She looked out the window where the trees blurred past in the low morning light and said, "I hope so. I really do." Ahead, the road curved gently toward the aid station, where a team would be waiting, unaware of the quiet procession on its way. 3 humans carrying a life between them, and 2 grisly hearts trailing behind in the mist. The road to the wildlife aid station was rough, carved into the earth by years of patrol trucks and supply vans. As the convoy bounced along the uneven path, the medics in the rear vehicle kept their focus fixed on the young grizzly cub lying still between them. Swaddled in layers of thermal blankets and warmed by hot water packs, the cub remained motionless, its chest rising and falling with a fragile rhythm. The woman seated beside it, Anna, kept one hand gently resting against its side, her eyes scanning the pulse oximeter clipped lightly to the cub's ear. "Heart rate's holding, but low," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. Beside her, her colleague Jason kept his gaze outside the rear window. Shadows flitted through the trees. "They're still there," he said quietly. "The adults. Tracking us from the woods." Anna didn't look up. "I know. Let them." Neither of them spoke of fear, but both felt it, sitting heavy beneath their ribs. It wasn't fear of attack, not exactly. It was the weight of being trusted by creatures who shouldn't trust them at all. The adult bears had made a choice, a silent, instinctive decision to let these strange, soft-skinned beings take their cub. And now, the medics bore that responsibility like a sacred burden. When the aid station finally came into view, a simple wooden structure built at the edge of a clearing with a low roof and large steel-frame doors, Anna felt her body release some of the tension it had been carrying. Jason radioed ahead, and 2 station staff emerged from inside, already donning gloves and rolling out a mobile stretcher. The vehicles came to a halt in a loose half-circle near the entrance. The tourists were instructed to remain in their vans, windows up but eyes open. No one protested. Even from inside, they could feel the weight of what was happening. The medics stepped out first. Carefully, wordlessly, they transferred the cub from their vehicle onto the waiting stretcher. The staff took over with practiced hands, wheeling the small, motionless body into the station as Anna and Jason followed close behind. Inside, the station was warm, clean, and humming with quiet efficiency. The cub was transferred onto a heated table under dim lights. And 4 was quickly inserted into a vein on its foreleg. Monitors were hooked up. The team moved like a single organism, fluid, fast, focused. No one wasted time speaking unless it mattered. Jason called out vitals. Anna prepped warming fluids. Another staffer started a glucose drip. For a long time, the only sounds in the room were beeping monitors and the soft hiss of oxygen flowing through the small nasal mask fitted around the cub's snout. Outside, the forest waited. The mist had lifted slightly, but the edge of the woods still held shadows. A station volunteer posted near the rear window gave a quiet alert, "They're here." Anna walked over and peered out. Just beyond the clearing, 2 figures stood still among the trees, the same adult bears, silent, statuesque, watching. She turned back toward the cub. "They never left." "They're waiting for news," Jason said softly. He didn't mean it as metaphor. Somehow, it felt exactly true. The cub remained unconscious. Hours passed. The sun crept higher, burning off the mist and casting golden light through the windows. But inside, time didn't seem to move. The staff rotated out in shifts, but Anna and Jason stayed. They cleaned the cub's paws, checked its gums, gently brushed twigs and dried sap from its fur. Everything was done with reverence, with care. They weren't just treating a patient, they were trying to earn back a trust that had been offered on borrowed time. At one point, the cub gave a twitch, just a subtle flick of one paw. Anna's breath caught. She leaned closer. Another twitch. A shudder in the shoulder. Then a small, dry sound, almost like a whimper. Jason checked the monitors. Heart rate rising. Breath slightly deeper. Stronger. The 4 fluids were taking effect. The warmth had reached the core. Slowly, slowly, the cub stirred. It took nearly an hour, but finally, its eyes fluttered open, glassy, unfocused, but alive. The room stilled. Anna leaned down, her face close but not too close. "Hey, little one," she whispered. "You're okay. You're safe." The cub blinked slowly. Its body trembled as it tried to shift, instinct pressing it to stand. It didn't get far, just a slight lift of the head before exhaustion settled it back down. But the spark was there. The will to move. Jason smiled, just a flicker at the corners of his mouth, but genuine. "She's a fighter." Outside, the bears waited. When Anna glanced again through the back window, the adults were still standing just at the tree lean. No sound, no movement. Just 2 enormous guardians holding their vigil. It's like they knew we wouldn't hurt her, Jason said. Like they recognized something in us. Anna didn't reply. There were no easy words for what had happened or was still happening. She walked outside for a moment, stepping quietly onto the gravel behind the station. The breeze was light now, brushing against her cheeks. The trees ahead stood tall and unmoving. And there they were, the two grizzlies. Just far enough to be safe. Just close enough to be sure. For a heartbeat, their eyes met, hers and the mother bear's. In that instant, Anna felt something unspoken pass between them. Not gratitude. Not understanding. But a kind of recognition, ancient and instinctive. As if the bear was saying, I have watched you. I have seen your hands. I will wait. Anna stepped back inside. She's stable, she said. Not strong enough to go yet, but close. Jason nodded. They kept the room dim, quiet, peaceful. Over the next hour, the cub rested, occasionally shifting its paws or blinking slowly. It drank from a bottle once, weakly. Hope grew. The tourists were eventually escorted away, their vehicles departing slowly, leaving only the medical staff, the station volunteers, and the unseen but ever-present guardians at the edge of the forest. Word had already begun to spread across radio and local ranger channels, but no press was invited. No drones flew overhead. This wasn't a story for headlines. This was something sacred. That night, no one slept deeply. Staff took turns watching the cub, monitoring its breathing, keeping the room warm and silent. Outside, the bears remained. When morning came, they were still there. And the cub, though tired and stiff, lifted her head, looked toward the open window, and made a quiet mewing sound. A call. A signal. Anna looked at Jason. He nodded. It's time. They didn't carry her out. They opened the rear door, let her walk, let her choose. And as she stepped onto the grass, still trembling, still fragile, but alive, she walked on her own toward the misty treeline, where two shadows waited. The sun was higher now, suspended in a cloudless blue sky, its rays cutting through the thinning morning mist like golden spears. The warmth that settled over the Denali Reserve was a soft, embracing kind, not harsh, but healing. At the wildlife station, however, time moved with a different rhythm. Inside the treatment room, though the cub had been led outside and was now resting in a shaded patch of grass not far from the open gate, the air still pulsed with caution and reverence. Every movement was measured. Every word, if spoken at all, was spoken in a whisper. Anna stood near the threshold, one hand resting lightly on the doorframe, her eyes locked on the tiny figure lying beneath a spruce tree not 20 yards from the building. The cub was curled up tightly, its breathing more even now, its ears twitching occasionally in response to distant birdsong or the rustle of leaves. And beyond it, further into the woods yet unmistakably present, stood the two adult bears. They hadn't moved, not truly. They had shifted slightly through the hours, repositioning as the sun crept across the sky. But they never broke formation. Never wandered. Always facing the clearing. Always watching. It was as though an invisible thread stretched from the cub's small recovering body to the massive forms standing beneath the treeline, one that pulsed with quiet energy and unspoken longing. Jason joined her at the door, cradling a mug of lukewarm coffee that he hadn't sipped. 6 hours now, he said softly, voice rough. Still there. Anna nodded but said nothing. What was there to say? The facts were plain and yet defied explanation. In any typical encounter, grizzly bears, especially mothers, would have charged, or fled, or at the very least, kept their distance after an incident like this. But these two had defied every known behavioral pattern. They had let humans take their cub. They had followed. They had waited. They continued to wait. You think they're really just watching? Jason asked. Or is there something else going on? Anna shook her head. I don't know. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's intelligence. Doesn't feel like either. It feels like something in between. Something older. He glanced toward the cub, then at the bears, then back at her. You think they're going to come closer? I think they're waiting for the right moment. Anna stepped outside, walking slowly into the light. The sun bathed her face in warmth, but she didn't smile. Her eyes remained fixed on the forest. She walked toward the cub, slow, cautious, respectful. The little one looked up, blinking lazily. It didn't flinch. Anna crouched beside it, checking its paws, the forepuncture on its leg, the state of hydration. Everything looked stable. Better. There was strength now, where earlier there had only been stillness. You're almost ready, aren't you? She murmured, brushing a bit of pine needle from its fur. Just a little longer. Behind her, Jason remained by the doorway, watching both her and the woods. The other staff inside remained quiet. Everyone understood now, this was no longer a simple case. This was a threshold between two worlds, human and wild, held open by the fragile, flickering thread of trust. As the day wore on, the cub napped in the sunlight, then roused to drink from a shallow bowl of water. It made soft grunts, curious little sounds, and sniffed the air as though trying to locate something long familiar. Several times, it looked toward the trees, and each time, the adult bears remained still, unmoving guardians standing among the shadowed trunks. At one point, a light breeze stirred the grass, and the cub rose clumsily to its feet, wobbling slightly. Anna and Jason held their breath. The cub took a few unsteady steps, then sat down again, but it was a beginning. The forest remained quiet, too quiet. Birds had ceased their calls near the station. Squirrels and smaller mammals kept low and out of sight. The presence of the two great bears had created a hush across the underbrush, as if the entire forest knew something sacred was unfolding and dared not interrupt. Evening began to creep in. Shadows stretched longer across the clearing. The sun began its descent, dipping toward the edge of the horizon and tinting the sky with faint strokes of amber and rose. In the station's common room, the staff discussed quietly whether to move the cub inside for the night or let it remain outside under observation. Anna stood firm. Let her stay. If they've waited this long, we owe them the chance to see it through. No one disagreed. Blankets were brought out and laid gently near the cub. A small heat lamp was set up at a distance. Jason remained outside while the others rotated in for food and rest. Night approached slowly, then all at once. The warmth faded from the air, replaced by the dry, brittle chill of high-latitude twilight. The sky turned cobalt. Stars began to blink awake. And still, the bears remained, just visible in the moonlight, still standing, still waiting. Anna returned to the cub around 10 o'clock. She sat down beside it, wrapping herself in a thick jacket, her breath fogging in the air. They're still out there, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she meant the bears, or the stars, or some unseen force holding the balance of this moment together. The cub, now visibly stronger, shifted and stretched, yawning wide, then looked out at the darkened forest. Its small ears perked up. Then came a sound, a low, soft chuff from the trees, barely audible but unmistakable. A call. Not urgent, not commanding, just a sound of presence. Recognition. The cub rose, not all at once, but with purpose. It turned toward the tree line, took one step, then another. Anna didn't stop it, didn't speak, didn't even breathe. The cub walked slowly, steadily across the field, through the grass, toward the trees. Toward the bears. The two massive figures did not move until the cub was halfway across the clearing. Then, in perfect synchronicity, they stepped forward. Not quickly, not aggressively, just forward. 20 yards. 15. 10. The cub made a small, almost happy grunt and broke into a wobbling trot. When it reached them, the larger bear, the mother, Shirley, lowered her head and gently nuzzled the cub's side. The second bear did the same, brushing its face against the cub's neck. For a long moment, the three bears simply stood there, pressed close together, a family reunited. No dramatics. No roars. No wide cinematic gestures. Just silent reunion. Jason had stepped out again and now stood beside Anna, both of them watching with open awe. "You think they'll just leave now?" he asked quietly. Anna didn't answer. The bears turned, first the adults, then the cub, and began to walk back into the trees. Back into the darkness. No hesitation. No fear. Just a return. The brush swallowed them slowly, gently. And then they were gone. The clearing emptied. The night deepened. And in the silence that followed, Anna felt a strange weight lift, not the absence of responsibility, but the fullness of something completed. A circle closed. A debt honored. Jason let out a long breath. "That's going to stay with me for the rest of my life." Anna smiled, but her eyes were still wet. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." Morning came softly, seeping through the canopy like melted gold, filtering through every needle and leaf until the forest floor was dappled in light. The wildlife aid station stood quiet, its weathered walls still carrying the memory of the night before. Inside, the staff moved with the kind of hush that comes after witnessing something rare, something holy. The bears were gone, and yet their presence lingered, like the echo of a song still resonating in the air long after the final note had been played. Jason poured coffee into 2 mugs and handed one to Anna. Without a word, she took it, nodded her thanks, and leaned against the railing of the back deck, her eyes scanning the tree line, though she knew they wouldn't return. Not today. Maybe not ever. But she looked anyway. The dew was still thick on the grass, and a few crows had begun to reclaim the clearing, hopping and pecking as if nothing extraordinary had happened there just hours before. A fox padded silently along the edge of the woods, paused as if sensing something strange in the earth, then slipped away. "Feels different," Jason said, his voice quiet, like we're standing in a church after the sermon's done. Anna gave a soft hum of agreement, sipping her coffee. "I don't know what that was," she said finally, "but it wasn't just biology. It wasn't just instinct." Jason didn't reply. There wasn't anything to add. They'd both seen the way the adult bears had moved, deliberately, with awareness, with restraint. The patience. The trust. The restraint not to intervene when their cub had been carried away. The silent presence outside the station for nearly a full day. The reunion that had unfolded without a sound, without fear, without anger. And perhaps most powerful of all, the way they had disappeared. Not in haste, but with grace. As though they knew the story had reached its end, and it was time to close the book. Later that morning, a park administrator arrived by helicopter. He was briefed quickly and spent an hour reviewing footage from one of the few low-res cameras mounted near the station. The video captured only fragments, blurry silhouettes through mist and trees, shapes that moved with heavy grace, shadows that became forms, then family. When he was done, he simply removed his glasses, rubbed his face, and said, "This stays between us. No media call. No press release. No drone footage leaked." The staff agreed without discussion. There was no hunger for recognition. No thirst for credit. What had happened didn't belong to science alone, or conservation, or even the reserve. It belonged to something older. The word that floated in Anna's mind was covenant, a pact between worlds that usually never touched, but for one stretch of time had overlapped through necessity and care. The day passed with a kind of stillness that mirrored the forest beyond. No new patients arrived. The tourists had all returned to the visitor center, still murmuring about what they'd witnessed, unsure how to process it. A few of them had cried in the vans, though they weren't sure why. A few others had deleted their photos, realizing somehow that the memory was more sacred if it remained unshared. That evening, Anna walked alone to the spot where the cub had first stepped back into the woods. The grass was bent where it had passed. A single claw mark scored the bark of a nearby tree, faint and harmless, as if left as a signature. She crouched there for a moment, resting her hand against the mark, and listened, not for footsteps or growls or movement, but for silence. For the kind of silence that comes only when something profound has ended. Then she rose and began the slow walk back. The next morning, she and Jason hiked a short loop through the area where the bears had waited. They found tracks, deep, clear prints pressed into the mud like fossilized memory. They didn't follow them far. They didn't need to. It wasn't about the direction. It was about the weight of presence. In the following days, the reserve staff worked quietly, returning to their duties, but changed. Subtly, each one. Conversations were softer. Arguments less frequent. A kind of reverence settled over the team, unspoken but ever-present. They had seen what it meant to be trusted by something wild. They had been offered a window into a moment of extraordinary grace. One afternoon, Jason found Anna sketching something in her notebook, 3 bears standing close together, the cub nestled between them. Their forms silhouetted against a soft mist. No detail. No dramatics. Just outlines. Just closeness. He watched her draw for a moment, then asked, "Think she'll be okay out there?" Anna nodded without hesitation. "She's got them. That's more than most." The weeks passed. Other animals came and went, elk with injuries, foxes with mange, a raven with a broken wing. But none brought with them the weight of that one morning in the mist. Sometimes, the team found themselves glancing toward the trees, half expecting to see the mother bear again, or the cub, stronger now, grown, returned out of curiosity or some threat of memory. But they never came. They didn't need to. What had happened wasn't meant to be repeated, it had been enough. One evening, near the end of summer, a small group of rangers and medics gathered outside the station with cups of coffee and blankets. They talked about the usual things, equipment repairs, trail closures, the arrival of autumn, and then, gently, the conversation drifted to that morning. Not in detail, not to dissect it, just to remember. One ranger said, "It's funny, we're trained to keep our distance, trained to never intervene unless absolutely necessary, but that day, it was like the rules didn't matter." Anna shook her head. No, the rules still mattered, but something more important did too. Jason added, "It wasn't just that we helped, it's that they let us." There was a pause, then a long, silent one, filled only by the crackle of a nearby lantern and the distant call of a loon across the lake. Eventually, the group dispersed, the conversation dissolving into the quiet of dusk. Anna lingered a while longer, staring out toward the trees. The stars were starting to appear, blinking softly, one by one. For a brief moment, just a flicker, she thought she saw movement far at the edge of the woods, a shifting shadow, a silhouette. But it passed, and she didn't chase it. She only smiled, stood, and whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." Behind her, the aid station glowed faintly with light, a quiet sanctuary built not just for treatment, but for moments like this. Moments when the world and the human touched, not in conflict, but in compassion. Somewhere deep in Denali, 3 bears walked beneath the canopy together, alive, whole, and across the clearing they had once stood. In a single truth, it remained suspended in the air like mist, that patience, humility, and care could bridge even the wildest of distances. Autumn crept into Denali with quiet authority, its breath cool and constant, turning the tips of the birches golden and copper. The scent of the frost shifted, no longer the wet, earthy perfume of summer, but something crisper, tinged with frost and fallen leaves. Wind swept gently across the ridges, carrying with it the faint, almost musical rustle of drying branches. At the wildlife aid station, life moved on as it always did. The memory of the bears, of that cub, of that reunion had settled into the place like a whispered story, passed from one breath to the next, often unspoken, but always present. It lingered in the air, in the way staff paused at the back door each morning to glance at the tree line, in the way tourists lowered their voices when they asked about grizzlies, in the way Anna sometimes found herself staring at the empty space in the clearing with a strange ache she couldn't quite name. She didn't expect to see them again. None of them did. But the mind plays tricks in quiet places, and hearts remember differently than heads. Some nights, she dreamed of the cub, not sick, not weak, but running through the underbrush with the lightness of youth, her fur healthy, her eyes bright. Sometimes, the dreams included the mother bear, silent and watchful, always just on the edge of her vision, as if making sure she was still watching too. One morning in mid-October, just as the frost had begun to linger past sunrise, Anna stepped out into the clearing and found tracks, not fresh, but not yet erased. One large, one slightly smaller, and one small, almost dainty, though pressed deep, as if the bear it belonged to had run hard through this very space. She didn't call for anyone, didn't take photos. She only crouched and placed her hand beside the print. Then, she closed her eyes. She thought of the long, misty morning months ago, the moment the cub stirred on the warming table, the silhouette of 2 great bodies in the trees, the soundless reunion, the way they had vanished without fanfare or ceremony. Her breath caught in her chest, not with fear, not with sadness, but with the strange fullness that sometimes comes when grief and joy are twined so tightly they're impossible to separate. Behind her, Jason approached, sipping from a tin mug, his boots crunching the frostbitten grass. "You saw them too, huh?" Anna didn't look up. "I don't know if it's them. Could be any grizzly." Jason knelt beside her, examined the tracks, and gave a low, knowing hum. "Could be," he said. "But you and I both know it's not." Anna stood slowly, brushing the frost from her gloves. "Why now?" she asked, not expecting an answer. "Why come back?" Jason didn't answer directly. He looked toward the woods. "Maybe it's just what we said that day. They let us help, and maybe now they're just letting us know it worked." The 2 of them stood there for a while, watching the forest as if the trees might speak. Eventually, Anna turned and walked back toward the station, her steps slow and even. She didn't tell the others. She didn't log the sighting. The prince would vanish by tomorrow, softened in wind and covered by falling leaves. That night, while most of the team had retired to their cabins, Anna sat alone by the back window, sketching again. Her pencil moved gently over the page, tracing the outline of a bear, not the cub this time, not the family, just a single bear walking through falling snow. Around it, the trees bowed low, their branches heavy with frost. She didn't draw eyes, didn't draw the forest floor, only shadow and shape. She didn't need detail, she already knew who it was. When Jason found her there hours later, he said nothing, just placed a fresh mug of tea beside her and sat down in the chair across from her. They didn't speak. They just listened, to the wind, to the groan of the log settling, to the silence that surrounded the station like a blanket. And deep in that silence, there was something else, a memory, a murmur. No, not quite. It was an echo. That's what Anna realized, not of sound, but a presence, a lingering warmth where something extraordinary had been, not gone, just moved on. The following morning, Anna took a walk alone along the edge of the river that curved behind the station. The water was clear, ice-cold, lapping softly against the stones. She stood by it for a long time, watching the current, thinking of the path the bears might have taken. Maybe they were far from here now, already settling into a den for winter. Maybe the cub had grown strong enough to fish on her own. Maybe they had found new valleys, new spaces untouched by roads and voices. She hoped so, but some part of her also hoped that when the snow melted and the air softened again in spring, they might return, not for help, not for treatment, but just to pass through, just to remind her that the line between wild and human isn't as sharp as people think, that there's a middle space, a bridge. She returned to the station just before lunch, her cheeks pink from the cold. The sky above was clean and pale, the way it gets in the deep north before snow. Inside, the common room buzzed with quiet conversation. A delivery of supplies had come in, and one of the newer medics was reading a field report aloud. But Anna barely heard. Her eyes drifted toward the window, toward the clearing, toward the line of trees. Nothing moved, and yet the echo remained. A few days later, a postcard arrived from a couple who had been in the original convoy, the tourists who'd witnessed the cub's rescue. It was addressed to Anna and Jason, though the names had been guessed. The note was simple, "We think about that morning often. It changed how we see the world. Thank you for letting us witness it." No name, no return address. Just a photograph of Denali's ridgeline on the front and a sketch of 3 bears etched faintly along the bottom margin. Anna smiled when she saw it, then tucked it into the station's logbook, not as a case file, not as a record, but as a keepsake, a reminder. The season wound down. Snow began to fall in earnest. Tracks became rare, and the forest quieted. Winter came, heavy and full and still. From time to time, someone would glance into the woods and pause a little longer than necessary, not expecting to see the bears, but remembering, feeling, listening for the echo. And on one still night, months later, long after the snow had buried the grass and the station lights had dimmed for the evening, a shape moved silently through the trees beyond the clearing, large, fluid, confident. It paused for a moment near the bend in the trail, lifted its nose to the air, and stood still, just watching. Then, slowly, it turned and disappeared into the forest. No sound, no sign.